Rupert the Bear or Banana Splits or something. We'd play some garbage. Well, I'm John Holmes. I've worked for the BBC for 53 years, but my love of music goes back before that. And I think that's the reason why I ended up working at the BBC, or one of the reasons I ended up working at the BBC. But I've worked in all sorts of different departments, including light entertainment, which meant recording a lot of the bands for Radio 1 and Radio 2, and also then moved into local radio. And in local radio, I got my headroom to play my music, because there was no rules. And so, I mean, when I arrived there, they had 20 albums, I think. And when I left, when I left at one point, they had 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, I don't know any. Then they threw them away. Well, it'd be nice to say it came from my parents. My parents had a radiogram, which was quite rare in those days. It was quite a posh one. And because we were posh people, no we weren't. And my father used to buy things like operas like La Bohème and lots of musicals like Oklahoma and King and I, My Fair Lady, when they first came out. And I used to listen to those. He never did, so I never quite understood why he bought them. But I'll tell you one thing, he had Tchaikovsky's Piano Concerto No. 1. I loved it. He never ever listened to it, but I listened to it all the time. So that's where it started. Harry Seacombe sings Richard Talbot, there's another one, an opera. So I started with that, and then rock and roll came along, and I started buying my own records. When rock and roll arrived, it must have been 1956 for me, so I'd be nine, yeah. And Bill Haley was the man at the time, because Elvis wasn't really around in our, because he had a film. Bill Haley was in a film called Rock Around the Clock, or something like that. And so I bought about 5 78s. Look, they break. Still got some 78s. Look at that, 78s. There was Bill Haley, but the most important thing to me was I bought a Tommy Steele. Now, lots of people say that Cliff Richard made the first rock and roll record in Britain. It's a load of rubbish. Cliff Richard was about 2 years later. Tommy did Rock with the Caveman, and I went out and bought that. And I had it on a 78, and of course Julie broke it. But I've still got some early Tommy Steele when he was a rock and roll singer.
Do you know where you first got it, that first record?
When?
Whereabouts?
Yeah, well, I used to live in Leigh-on-Sea, which is in Essex, near Southend. And I was at the record shop, which is down the road. And there was record shops all over the place at the time.
Do you know the name of it? No.
I mean, the one I used to go in the end down there was Hodges and Johnson's. They were a well-known record shop. I can't for life. It was some electrical shop. They just happened to sell records at the bottom of the road. I think it was easier to have wide tastes in those days. There were so many different, like a Catherine wheel, in popular music now, isn't it? There's all different forms. Whereas in those days, there was the chart. So for popular music, you had the top 20, later on the top 30. So you could then, it was very easy to diversify. So whilst I was buying records of rock and roll, I was also going to operas, I was going to the classical theatre, going to classical concerts, and I was going to see jazz. So I right across the board, I loved all that music. I still do. I came here because I was very good at maths, and the teacher at school, the careers teacher, said, "Well, if you're good at maths, you better do engineering." I didn't know what engineering was. So I did engineering. I got mechanical engineering, but then I applied for a scholarship within the National Coal Board. National Coal Board paid for everything. So your parents didn't have to get a grant or anything. They paid for the lot. So I thought, well, I'll go for that. And I got it. And so then I said to the Coal Board, well, if I get a Coal Board scholarship, shall I do mining engineering? So I did mining engineering, and they engineered it that I came up to either Newcastle or Nottingham. And there was no, as far as I was concerned, there was no contest, because Nottingham had Nottingham Playhouse with the theatre, the Nottingham Forest Football Club, the cricket club, had everything I wanted here. So I came here and never left. Worked for the Coal Board. I had a back injury, which went back to when I was playing sport at school, sciatic problems. So I really couldn't finish my cold ball training properly. You have to do coalface training. I loved it down the pit. I mean, I really did. It was great fun. But I knew I wasn't going to be doing it forever. That's easy, you know. If you're going to be doing it all your life, you might not love it so much. But I loved what I did, and I loved the people I worked with. And I stayed visiting the miners' welfares and the stoots, visiting all the going to the pubs there, the clubs. But my real love, despite being good at maths, was the arts. There's the theatre, cinema and music. And I fancied myself as a bit of an actor, but that never happened. But music was a big driving force. So the careers teacher had a computer at Nottingham University, one computer called the Atlas. It was enough to fill this room. I mean, it was huge. And they decided they would diversify from research into giving music for other things like careers advice. So I filled in a form, and they put it in some machine. It came out, don't do any more engineering. Why don't you become a studio manager or a stage manager? So I said, well, I'll become a stage manager because Nottingham Playhouse is just around the corner. And you see, when you're a stage manager in those days, you could be a spear carrier and come on the stage as well. But then they said, the BBC is actually going around the country, looking for looking for recruits. I mean, when you think the BBC was recruiting and going around the country. So I did this interview, and I ended up going to Broadcasting House, and they seemed to like me. And so I joined the BBC they didn't call it studio manager, but as a studio manager, working on, as I say, light entertainment and pop music, which was great. Loved it.
And then once you were in there, how did you end up becoming a DJ?
Well, the great thing about the BBC is that certainly in those days, they've advertised all the jobs and anybody can go for them. And I ended up for a time, they thought, because my wife was living in Nottingham by then, she was living in Nottingham as a nurse, I was living in London, it seemed daft. One of them had to move. So they said, well, why don't you try working at Birmingham? Pebble Mill wasn't there, it's called Broad Street. So I worked for a time at Pebble Mill, working on programmes like Midlands Today, just behind the scenes, and on the spot effects of the Archers. So I worked on the Archers. That was terminated in the end because I kept going home rather than staying on. And it's a long story, but I went back to London. And then they said to me, obviously trying to get rid of me, why don't you go up to Nottingham for there's a burgeoning new thing called local radio. I'd already been listening to local radio on Rediffusion Channel C because we had it in our flat. So I wasn't all that enamoured of it, but they did have, every now and then there's some good stuff on. There was a program called Jazz on the Heath, Al Heath, and he introduced bands like Chicago Transit Authority and Blood, Sweat and Tears. There's a nice classical music program. And it seemed like a good idea, so I bubbled up and duly got the job. So I was what they call a station assistant. So not a producer. That's what I was aiming for, a producer, that was the thing. It's hard work to get a producer in those days. And I thought I'd just be working behind the scenes. And on my first day joining, they said, you've got to make some announcements. So I'm not going in front of a microphone. That's not quite the idea. I mean, I might want to be an actor, but I don't want to be in front of a microphone. I was terrified. I think I had to say, and at that point we say goodbye to Jimmy Young and join Anne Morris with Levenses, which is a programme for women. And I remember froze on the. I'd love to hear what it sounded like, but there was a woman called Kit Poxon standing over me, guiding my hands on the faders. I was terrified. Every SA, station assistant, would do a programme called Brand Tub, which was a programme with squeaky toys for children. It was on every day. It was a request programme. And the women, I was the only male there, and the women were absolutely terrified of this male working on their programme. But I took over, I did a lot of Brand Tub with a cheeky little squirrel called Squeg and a nice little lamb called Syrup. And Squeg would go down to the Brand Tub, squeak, 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 come out the Brand Tub with another postcard, and I'd read it out, and then we'd play the record. Inevitably, it was Rupert the Bear or Banana Splits or something. We'd play some garbage. A chap came along called Jonathan Holmes, funnily enough, who was a general trainee. They were very posh people, but they were destined for big things in television. And he said we ought to have a youth programme which lasted 15 minutes. and we'll call it Extravaganza. And I worked on that, and I worked along another side who was a guy called Don Truscott, who he had a big disco setup. He was the bees and knees in Nottingham. It was called Don's Gear. That's where you went to see Don Truscott. He worked there, and we worked alongside each other when Jonathan left, and we worked on this program called Extravaganza, which Tom Beasley set up as an hour-long program, youth program, which was just music. But when Don left, I took over with Ashley Franklin, and that's where that began, really. Because it was just a heyday, wasn't it? Radio 1 would be, on the whole, not all the time, but on the whole, was just playing singles, charts. But we had the albums coming out now. We had these new bands were coming along, like Yes, 10 years after, or 10 years after it's already around, but people like that, who played long tracks. There was Genesis, of course, and Van der Graaf Generator, and all these bands. And we could get our teeth into it. The crazy thing is, though, they gave us a 10 o'clock slot on a Saturday morning for that sort of music. It was exploratory music. They wouldn't dare do that now. We don't want to lose listeners. But we had a big audience, and we still get people coming up to me and saying, in fact, at this Pint of a half of vinyl, people are there who saw me or listened to me on Extravaganza, and they say, the reason I've got into this album was because I listened to John Holmes on Radio Nottingham. We got complaints. Understandably, actually, when I look back, I was playing things by Frank Zappa, and some of that, you wouldn't dare play it now. It was, definitely not PC at all. So I was playing things like that, and we got people saying, I have a young daughter, and she heard these lyrics, and going, oh well, it's, I don't know.
Must have been an amazing time for radio, though, because
when the Stones brought out an album called Goat's Head Soup, which is how naughty I was. And there's a track on it called Star FFF. Don't know what the word is. And for me, it was the only good track on the album. So I wanted to play that. I wanted to open the show on that. So I phoned up London. And I said, I've got the new Rolling Stones album, Goat's Head Soup. Are there any tracks banned? He said, no, you can play anything. I said, right. So I played it, and they used the F word something like 32 times.
Did you get in trouble for that?
No. It's lost its way, I think. And certainly certainly certain areas of radio have, thanks to management in the BBC, which I think is appalling. But there we are. It's another story.
What's the story? Why do you think it's poorly managed?
Because this is not sour grapes. Because I was just old enough to retire. But if you have a local radio station, it should be local radio, not some music station with a few stupid, banal comments in it. It should be part of the community. It's essential it's part of the community. And to say, we'll just make it regional is absolutely ludicrous. Some of the highlights are working with the up-and-coming bands in Nottingham. Bands like Plummet Airlines, Gaffer. I've got a couple of posters over there, which I'll show you, of the bands that we used to work with. So there were some great local musicians. They really should have done better, should have been bigger. But we didn't have that stage. East Midlands music wasn't, topical. Whereas West Midlands was, because you had bands like Black Sabbath came through, and the Specials. So that was that. But then there was the other people I was lucky enough to interview. Where you start. Memorable interviews for me would be, I remember doing John Martin, who was a sort of folk singer, and I loved doing that. Oh God, where do I start?
What was your experience with John Martin? Because he's quite an odd character, I've heard.
He was. Well, this is where I learnt very early on to do research. So, if you can good interviewers it's like a game of tennis. You keep banging the ball back, and if they flip you a quick one, you bang it back quickly. Alan Sillitoe, I know he's not a music person, but he'd come. Say, so you wrote West Side. You wrote Saturday Night, Sunday Morning. Yes. And that's what he'd just give you one word answer, but you knew he was going to do that, so you bang the ball back. And that's the same with some musicians, and that John Martin was a bit like that. In the end, I was asking him such technical questions. He said, John, you have to remember I'm working on a new album. This was 6 months ago. I can't remember. It was great. But he told me some great stories, about being on the road. And, he was a nice man. I love his music as well. But there we are. Did John Cale, who was in he just left Velvet Underground. He'd gone solo. Did him. Goodness, where do you start? I suppose the Beach Boys, Mike Love from the Beach Boys when they were in Leicester. Oh, I don't know where to start. When I wanted to insure them, I did it by measuring. You count the number of records in a metre, and then obviously, but I can't remember. No, I can't remember. But it's not. It won't resonate really with a lot of people. But I was madly in love with a girl on Cavey Island. That's where Dr. Feelgood comes from, and we had a song called "Every Time I Say Goodbye" by Ella Fitzgerald. Ella Fitzgerald I used to adore, and I wanted to get a copy of it. I didn't have much money. I actually went to a second-hand record shop, knowing it was going to be there, and I flicked through the records, and there it was. Every Time I Say Goodbye, the other side of Manhattan, and in pristine condition. And you just do that every now and then, don't you? I used to go for bargains, and some of the bargains are some of the great records. I didn't go to many shops in Nottingham. Selector Disc and Way Ahead went around. I think I go home, I was at university, I went home and bought the records there. But then I must have bought records once we got married. I can't remember where we bought them from.
And he's still buying records now?
No.
Why not?
Well, I haven't got any room. The only way I could think of doing this collection is in alphabetical order. Radio Nottingham's was in as the records came in, but so everything is in alphabetical order. So A's up there and Z's down there. There's a jazz section and a classical music section, but that's basically it. So it's easy, just as long as you're really good at the alphabet. This is the one I love. Where is it? Yeah, look at this. Thick as a Brick, which he performed at the Albert Hall in Nottingham. And it's actually a newspaper. And look at that. With stupid bylines in it. I have to say, these are just sort of gimmicky things, really, because they're not the ones, not necessarily my favourite albums. This is a good one. This is before Bob Marley had his name on the album. It's called Wailers Catch a Fire. This is a lighter. So Yes songs. Look at the artwork there. It's like a book. When I first started doing pieces of my son, we do a sort of we do our own log own blog thing. He said to me, "Pull out a record by the Cramps," because he said you saw them. So the Cramps. Now I've got to have a look for this. It's Clapton. Oh. It must be it, wasn't it? That's it. So I pulled it out. There it is. Cramps. With all the paraphernalia that goes with it. And signed by all the band. Now just a signed autograph. Just one of them is worth about £100. But the Cramps came to Nottingham with the Police. Both bands were virtually unknown. Cramps were known for being a punk band from America. It was like the rebirth of punks of 79, I don't know, somewhere around there. And Police had, although they had these records out on this obscure record label, I think the early ones, they didn't chart. It was only when A&M took them over that they charted. But they were on tour here, and I was terrified of interviewing them actually. They look a bit weird, don't they? They appeared at Rushcliffe Leisure Centre just up the road. So that was an interesting one. These are the people really. John Mayall's Blues Breakers. See Eric there? The famous Beano cover they called him. Eric, of course, went on to be Cream, and I saw Cream at the Beachcomber in Nottingham. I missed seeing Hendrix at the Beachcomber because my mates wouldn't go. They said the crumpet was better at the Dungeon.
They've got the priorities wrong.
Yeah, they did, because we didn't pick up any nice birds, and I missed seeing Hendrix. Was his first appearance in Nottingham. In our digs, we listened to a lot of music, and included classical music by Mahler and people like that. And there was also the bands and artists like Otis Redding, my hero at the time. It has an album which has tracks on it from mostly America, but I get no satisfaction on it, the Stones number. But notice, he's not on there. A Man of Colour is not on there. It was years later that the Americans started to put a picture of a black person on a black person's label, a cover, because it just didn't sell records. See, no picture of Otis, no picture of Otis. It's disgraceful, isn't it? This man had such stage presence. I saw him a couple of times, one in Birmingham, when I think, I can't remember, Do It Yourself came out as an album, in Jury. And I saw him at in Woollerton Park. He did an open air festival in Woollerton Park. What a guy! He held an audience. I love people who can hold audiences. I do admire that. You can see other people now, like Dylan. I was a big fan of Dylan. I went to see one of his first concerts when it came to the Royal Albert Hall in London. We got down there to see him. It was sort of just tour before it went acoustic. So when I went to see him again, Dylan, he had no presence at all, just come on stage. My wife said after 20 minutes, when's Bob Dylan coming on? He'd already been on 20 minutes. Whereas we've got people like, as I say, Ian Jury, who held an audience. And there was, I'll tell you another one who's very good, and that's Lionel Richie. My wife loves Lionel Richie. He gets an audience and he slowly holds them in the palm of his hand. And that is such a skill. It must be so thrilling for an artist. So Ian Jury was certainly one of them. When they first came out, the record company sent me tickets. I sat in the balcony, front row of the balcony at the De Montfort Hall, because we didn't have a place to watch music in those days, in Nottingham really. And I was the only one there from the press. No one else turned up. So there's a whole front row empty. And the whole stage was whited out with white sheets. The only lights you saw were the little neon lights telling you that the amplifiers were on. And then watching the skies open, and he just stood there with his bat wings. We didn't know he had bat wings at the time. And then the fluorescent lights came on, and there's these two fluorescent eyes and two bats, and the bats' wings. And he sang "Watching the Skies," and I thought, my God, that is just sensational. And of course, it carried on with much more theatre, and he got very, very theatrical by the time he did this album. So this is the first time I saw Ray Charles at Finsbury Park Astoria. This is an interesting one. Nottingham Festival of Blues and Progressive Music, 1970. And there's your lineup. Most notable ones. Mungo Jerry obviously closed the first half. Atomic Rooster, they were Crazy World of Arthur Brown's backing band at the time, or just finished. You've got Taste, it's Rory Gallagher, and Family, who's still one of my heroes. I love Family. Roger Chapman. That's when an incredible swing band came to Nottingham. Oh, this is a nice one. You know, those glossy programmes they have now. This is the New Musical Express Poll Winners Concert, 1962 to 63. So there were April the 21st, 1963, and there's Cliff Richard, Billy Fury, Adam Faith, Frank Ifield, The Shadows, The Tornadoes. And I haven't got the ticket. Look at that, 20 shillings, a lot of money. Got Adam Faith to sign it. And the Springfields with Dusty, look. But this is the crowning glory. After Joe Brown and Jet Harris, we get guest attractions, the Beatles. How about that? They didn't even warrant a picture. They were very good as well. The Jazz and Blues Festival, that was a very good one. That's at Sunbury. They used to have, like they have now, annual festivals. But the big one in Britain in the old days, in the 60s, was the Jazz and Blues Festival, which was run from the Marquee in London. So the lineup here is amazing. You've got Marmalade. Okay, yeah, Marmalade. I don't even bother to see them. Incredible String Band. Arthur Brown. John Mayall. The Nice. Keith Emerson. Jerry Lewis. Jeff Beck. Spencer Davis. Traffic with Stevie Winwood. Funny enough, I must have missed. I know that Jethro Tull was on as well. See, Deep Purple don't even get a picture. Deep Purple were on. But that's when I first saw Jethro Tull. He must be in there somewhere. One of the things they had a drum clinic. They had Ginger Baker on with Phil Seaman playing the drums. And it was sort of one side of drums, the other side drums, and it's sort of like a battle. And the bloke just stood on the sort of front of the stage with his back to the audience, just playing the guitar, saying some lovely riffs. And everybody clapped, Ginger Baker, Phil Seaman. And then they said, oh, and Eric Clapton, the place erupted. I started up putting them on, the one I did at the Playhouse. Oh, this is the Playhouse one. And BBC said, you can't do that sort of thing. So I said, all right, then I'll do it on my own. Then they actually came good, and Tom Beasley was the station manager. Said, okay, we'll back you, because if it went wrong, I was going to lose about 100 quid, which is a lot of money. So there we are, that's the lineup at the Playhouse. Cisco, Desperate Dan, Gaffer, who's still going, Plummet Airlines, Slender Loris, people around that time that bring back a lot of memories. And I've got this battered poster from the bandstand. That's the bandstand on the Victoria Embankment. We use that. Wheels, Limelight, Orphan, Gaffer, Mataka, Staple Diet. Oops. I'm quite proud of that. It's that being able to hold it. You talk to people and say, "Oh, my stuff's all online," or they go, and you go into a pub and you say, "What's that piece of music?" And they go, "Don't know." They don't know what they're playing. It's all been streamed out. And the thing about an album is it's got a beginning and an end, and it's got different tracks on it, and some of the most unusual ones come up, which you've then, first time round you dispense with, and then later on you come to love. And it's also being able to hold it, isn't it? And look at the information. We look at this Sleaford Mob. If this was a CD, it'd be boring. But look at this. I mean, it pulls out. All the lyrics are there. It's wonderful. I love albums. Even CDs don't fulfil that, do they?